double agent type thing.
He's very strong. Napoleon thinks I'm crazy.
One of Long and Beasley's last hopes lay with the U.S. Supreme Court.
The defeat for the death row inmate, Napoleon Beasley.
But just this morning, it denied the appeal.
Three justices abstained as High Court declines to halt Texas execution. So much for that.
Back in Huntsville, that means the state is one step closer to carrying out its 12th execution of the year.
This is a time that we spend now kind of making our plans for the execution.
Larry Fitzgerald's next job is to choreograph the media response.
You gonna like it too? Yeah.
Rows of chairs and a sound system are set up. High-profile cases can attract hundreds of journalists from around the world.
I do have a Beasley folder. This has all of his information.
One of the journalists who has a close eye on the Beasley case is cub reporter Michelle Lyons.
This Michelle may help you. I am not sitting at my desk right now. Just find a place.
She writes for the local paper, the Huntsville Item.
French journalist. I witness executions because this is part of my job. The way I look at it is just that covering executions is something that goes with covering the prison beat. And as long as I cover the prison beat, I don't really have a big say in the matter. Ms. Lyons, I've read many articles that you have written in notes. I was really frustrated this morning because I have just been getting more emails and more ugly letters and phone calls and all sorts of things from people that are telling me I'm a bad person, that I'm cold. Maybe you should try sometimes to get both sides of the story.
Lyons is present at all the executions she covers.
Tonight, the execution of Napoleon Beasley will be my 50th execution.
You're how old?
I'm 25.
You're 25 years old, and you've seen, by your own count, 50 executions. That must affect you, doesn't it?
I think if you're a reporter, you're going to cover unpleasant things. You know, I've seen a lot uglier things than watching an execution in which it does appear that you're watching someone go to sleep.
This is potentially the last time you'll ever see your son. Beasley's mother, Rena, knows that her son won't wake up from this sleep. Are you coming back tomorrow?
No.
She wants to be at his side to the end, but he's asked her to stay away from his execution.
These are his wishes. You know, we'll do what we have to do. I was there in the beginning. I gave birth. He came, you know, he came through my birth canal. He's mine. And I hope he's there in the, you know, it's whatever he wants. He chose.
Today may be the last time she sees her eldest son alive. They said they could cure. Breakfast at the Cafe Texan in Huntsville. Where many mornings you're sure to stumble onto a meeting of the Ain't It Awful Club.
His last 11 hits before last night were home runs. Did you read that?
A bull session over bacon and grits, with gripes and opinions on just about everything. Everything except the execution coming up that evening, just 4 blocks away from this diner.
Is it a topic of discussion here in Huntsville?
Not really, unless it's in the headlines. You know, we just go on with our lives. We don't know about it.
This town has averaged an execution every month for the past 20 years, so Napoleon Beasley's has barely made the local headlines, even as the clock ticks towards his death. Of course, the brutal murder he committed and his conviction 7 years ago were major news.
It could have happened to anyone.
Shock and disbelief and understatement.
it's just more than we can comprehend that he could be involved in something like this.
Yeah, ain't it John Luby's head?
He said, I want to see what it's like to kill somebody.
We, the jury, find the defendant, Napoleon Beasley, guilty of capital murder.
I was 17 when I was incarcerated, 18 when I was tried, and 18 when I got death row.
Beasley is in many respects the last person you'd expect to meet on death row. He was president of his high school class in Grapeland, Texas. He was runner-up in a school popularity contest, a football star who hoped for a college scholarship. His father, Ireland, was the first black man elected to the city council of Grapeland. So how did Napoleon Beasley become a murderer? He has no good explanation.
I couldn't blame my mom. I couldn't blame my parents. I couldn't blame my friends. I couldn't blame society. I couldn't blame the courts for being here, for being on death row. I believe I was old enough to understand what was going on in my life. I was old enough to understand the consequences behind any acts I made.
On April 19, 1994, Napoleon Beasley and two of his friends, Donald and Cedric Coleman, decided to steal a car. Armed with guns, the three drove aimlessly until they reached the larger town of Tyler. There they spotted a Mercedes.
Beasley saw the car. He said, that's the car I want. And
Jack Steen prosecuted the Beasley case.
Beasley had told other students at the high school, referred to the how would it be if I drove a Mercedes in tomorrow.
The Mercedes they went after belonged to John and Bobby Lutig, who were returning home from Dallas. Beasley and the Coleman brothers followed them. As the Lutigs pulled into their garage, Steen says Napoleon Beasley and Donald Coleman ran up the driveway. Beasley grabbed John Lutig as he got out of the car and forced him to the ground. Then he shot him in the head.
At this point, Mrs. Ludig is trying to get on out of the car. Donald Coleman was on the right side of the car, and Beasley hollered at Donald Coleman, shoot the bitch, meaning shoot Mrs. Ludig.
But Coleman didn't, and so Beasley shot at Mrs. Lutig twice. He missed.
Mrs. Ludig had now crawled on down underneath the vehicle and was basically down trying to act like she was dead, trying not to move, knowing that she was in the process of seeing her husband murdered.
Beasley leaned over and shot John Lutig again, this time point blank. Lutig was killed instantly. Mrs. Lutig doesn't want to talk about that night, but she did testify at Beasley's trial.
I was wondering what the bullet would feel like as it went through my back. I was wondering how it would feel to die.
When Beasley fired his final shot, Mrs. Lutig heard her husband cry out.
I had never heard a sound like that. I never heard the horror that was in his voice.
Mrs. Lutig's dramatic testimony helped seal Beasley's fate.
Under the provisions of Texas law,
After a 3-week trial, the jury convicted him and sentenced him to death.
by means of lethal injection.
Steve Aubuchon was one of the jurors.
There's no doubt in my mind that Napoleon Beasley qualified for the death penalty in this case. Mr. Ludig probably appealed for his life on that concrete floor, but Mr. Beasley did not grant Mr. Ludig an appeal. He went ahead and executed him, and also believed that we did not sentence him to death. He earned the right to be put to death according to the laws of the state of Texas.
The verdict brought the Lutigs a measure of relief.
And I thought this was an appropriate case for the death penalty, and I was pleased that that's the verdict that the jury returned.
I hope this will send a message loud and clear that we cannot tolerate such crime in our country.
The family turned down our request for an interview, but whatever happens to Napoleon Beasley, it's impossible for them to forget John Lutig's death.
I don't think any one of us can ever measure the amount of grief, the loss that they have suffered by losing her husband, their dad.